This poem is called Let This Darkness Be a Bell Tower. And I'm so sorry in my still waking up hours. It's Rilke. Quiet friend who has come so far. Feel how your breathing makes more space around you. Let this darkness be a bell tower, and you, the bell. As you ring, what batters you becomes your strength. Move back and forth into the change. What is it like, such intensity of pain? If the drink is bitter, turn yourself to wine. In this uncontainable night, be the mystery at the crossroads of your senses. The meaning discovered there. And if the world has ceased to hear you, say to the silent earth, I flow. To the rushing water, speak, I am. Let's all take in one more deep breath together, inhaling into the center of your belly. Let's do that again. And if you'd like to, sigh out loud as you exhale. Please gently open your eyes. And as we transition to some reflections that I'll share, and then I'll open it up to have you get a chance to share a little bit with each other, ask some questions. I encourage anyone who wants to be on the screen to do so. We can create community, which we all need, which is actually the most important medicine we have access to today in many ways. It's not a requirement to visually get to see one another, but it is an invitation if you are willing. So thanks for being here. And I'm going to just say up front that my heart aches for all of you who have been most directly impacted by the California fires, and for all of us collectively that are witnessing, that are bearing compassionate witness to displacement on so many levels in our world right now. And also the kind of displacement that I think is a sort of psychic, emotional, and psychological experience of witnessing so much rapid and accelerated change that feels beyond our control in our world right now due to the acceleration of the polycrisis we are facing. Just curious how many people resonate with what I just shared and can feel that sense of a kind of displacement just through the disorientation of change. How many people here, and I might invite you before we go further, share in the chat box, have been displaced yourself physically or impacted directly just by being in that vicinity, the California fires, because that's one of the circles of displacement in a series of concentric circles that we can presence today. Maybe show of hands, many people who have been directly impacted and bearing witness. Yeah, and so many of us have loved ones. And so when Mark and I, well, I'll share this. On September 27th, in a morning that we were simply preparing for a storm, like we've had many storms in the mountains where we lived. and had received not one word or encouragement that it was going to be a bigger storm in Black Mountain where we were based, or that we needed to evacuate. Um, Very quickly that morning, it had the dial turned up in such a way that we recognized we were in a life-threatening, dangerous situation beyond anything we had experienced in our life. And within an hour, our entire house had been torn down by the storm. We narrowly escaped. Many of you know I got taken under, trapped, and tumbled in the mudslide and flood, and managed to escape and managed to live through that. And that's extraordinary. And I'm still recovering. My husband is still recovering from a life experience we couldn't have imagined in this lifetime, which included our personal displacement and included the bearing witness to our entire region changing shape and form. In still today, they are devastated. When we left the East Coast in the middle of the fall, after family and friends had sheltered us there, a different place each week. So we lived out of suitcases for a long time until 2 weeks ago when we landed here. The last day of our trip on the East Coast, there were 8 fires in New Jersey in November, where it was 80 degrees, unfathomable, and yet another instance of the climate events that are accelerating. And when we went to California, where we first landed, there was an atmospheric river arriving, which invited us to change our course. And on our final day in Southern California, in LA, we witnessed through the windows of the plane we were about to take to Hawaii the start of the Palisades fire. So I want to just offer humbly, there might be some supports I can offer to those of you here through the gems that I've harvested and the practices that have supported us so deeply this fall. There is no better preparation for the changes we are facing than an embodied meditation practice from my perspective. I'll remind us that on one level, certainly we can meditate as a way of uh, grounding ourselves, centering ourselves, knowing how to come back to the moment. That is the first layer of wisdom, that practice of presence. And because I don't know many of you, I'll remind us that those practices can take many forms. But on the deeper level, a meditation practice prepares us like nothing else can for change. It prepares us for reality. It prepares us for death and dying. And from the moment we are born, we are in a process of dying. It is not something any of us can escape. So just to pause, to take in a deep breath, to really ground yourself in your listening as we go forth. As I share, I want to name that grief is a really, really unique feeling. I think different than all other emotions. Someone who's navigated a lot of grief in this lifetime, and the encouragement I have for those of you who are present to grief, either of what you're personally bearing witness to, what we're bearing witness to globally, both, all of it, is that there's a middle way to find where we can honor grief. We cannot avoid or numb ourselves out or anesthetize grief. It is not useful. We have to metabolize grief, but we can also recognize that grief is a portal to the truth of impermanence, the way things actually are, fleeting, impermanent, here for only a moment and then gone. And so how do we find our way in this reality of impermanence being truth? How do we find our way in this reality, especially when many of us have been conditioned, as I noticed in the world I was growing up in when I lost my dad at age 11, that it wasn't a paradigm which recognized or honored grief. And I'm speaking of the dominant paradigm right now. It was a paradigm that almost you should turn away entirely from the descent, from contemplating death, when in Buddhism, true aliveness and actually joy uh, alongside grief, joy and grief as two sides of the same coin of vibrant aliveness and personal and community resiliency, comes from recognizing reality. So many people today are acknowledging, I'm now seeing changes that we had heard would happen in our world, but they're happening faster than expected. Change makes us uncomfortable. And all the things that have made us feel secure externally, that have kept us feeling safe or in a sense of consistency, are gone. It makes us really uncomfortable. Many of you know that, as I do, from direct life experiences. But there is no ground underneath what we think of, what we've thought of as solid. There is no ground underneath what we've thought of as solid. That's an illusion, and that's a good thing. Because if it was all stuck, there would be a deadness to life rather than a vibrant aliveness. In the moment that Mark and I watched our home get taken away and dissolved in ways we could never have fathomed in a period of time that was so quick, it was almost a snap of the fingers. And in the time that I got tumbled down beneath my house in the rubble and nearly died, there was both shock and there was also a sense of freedom. This is a freedom of the heart I'm speaking of, freedom to recognize reality. Reality is that there is no solid ground beneath us. And so from this place, we get to remember. It's not even a practice of cultivation, it's really a remembering how to ground in groundlessness, how to be intimate with the fluidity and motion of life in a way that is more heart-based and more permeable than when we're in a fixed sense of separate self. So just to pause and invite, if you can touch this in your own experience, perhaps to nod or raise hand. Just the question I'm curious about is how many of you are aware of, even though there's a knowing that these walls, for instance, that are sheltering me right now are not here forever, even though there's a knowing that this being does not stay one age forever, still the kind of shock or surprise continually for the human being who's bearing witness and still feeding the illusion of a stuckness. Anyone? And so the freedom, I want to speak to this for a moment. In the very same moment that we watched everything get washed away in our lives, and it felt devastating, devastating. And I'm still today, just yesterday, I said to my husband, you know, even today, I can touch the resentment of how much bureaucracy I still have to deal with, as I was on the phone for hours yesterday dealing with a particular post-hurricane bureaucracy. And even today, like over 3 months later, I can feel the sort of insecurity of even like teaching always in a different space where I had this sacred space office that took me years to have a home, something I had always wanted. It was our first home that we had purchased, and the gardens there, we were in intimate relationship. So alongside the human experience of still feeling loss, I miss my community there so much. I was ripped away from my intimate community, from my neighbors. Um, Alongside that, a deep sense of freedom to be put even more in touch with the reality of being human and of being alive today. I want to pause and remind us that there is an opportunity, there is an opportunity to come home, to be home, to reorient ourselves to home as a living moment by moment practice instead of a fixed static place. My friend Ethan Nichtern, Tibetan Buddhist teacher, in his book, The Road Home, says the shift that's needed now is from being a commuter, one transfixed constantly by the idea of arriving home, okay, to a refugee, one who is aware that home is nowhere and everywhere, constantly arriving and constantly thrown out. He says, so often our idea of home is whatever we hope will magically be waiting for us after the current disruption. So for instance, like something's off, but once that's back in balance, or once I attain that thing, or once I've made more money, or once I've fixed my health, then I can come home. And actually, in that, home becomes like a shifting mirage, okay? In a, he says, increasingly repetitive desert. Practice invites us to live home as a verb. Practice invites us to live community as a verb. Wherever we are, we have this capacity. Wherever we are, we have the ability to recognize and remember how to be held by interconnection. This is truth, the interdependence and our place here. In my experience of losing my home, was reminded that home can both be a place that nurtures us and shelters us and keeps us safe. And it can also be a place that we are allowing to support the sense of separate self. Some habit patterns that each of you might have connected to your home, your habits there, some ways that home as this thing that I have separate from my neighbors. And I want to say specifically in my witnessing of our orientation to home in the United States, for instance, there's a very individualistic sense, like my home. People know what I'm pointing to with that. So when I was growing up, my first experience of bearing witness to displacement collectively is that my mother is an activist, social justice activist, and she took on from a calling in her heart, finding creative solutions for the systemic homelessness epidemic, which is still ain't even bigger today due to shifts in politics, but even then was a tremendous, devastating field to bear witness to in Los Angeles and so many other places. Yeah. And so I'm going to repeat what I said a few minutes ago. Home as a verb, as a living practice of coming home to this moment and offering this to others, to whatever beings, recognizing that tomorrow isn't our business. It's not. We know nothing about tomorrow. Home is now. Community is now. Community is a choice, is a practice. And I also want to acknowledge with compassion in my heart how many people have less of a felt experience of community than others. And one of the things that I've been grateful and privileged for in our aftermath of the hurricane is that we have been held by community. We don't take it for granted, it's a gift. So just notice how what I'm sharing is speaking to you. Collectively, I'm aware that we are bearing witness to and will continue to so many instances of beings displaced on planet Earth, ranging from climate refugees to refugees of war, the homeless, those who are incarcerated, children being displaced right now in the United States, immigrant families and the child welfare system, animals displaced. And as we bear witness, I want us to take a minute, maybe rest your eyes in a soft gaze or close, to also be aware of perhaps in your own lineage, ancestry, certainly in our collective ancestry, the phenomenon of displacement. Here I am in the land of Hawaii. Our country was built on and through displacing indigenous peoples who had called these lands home for thousands of years. So maybe I think we've had a period of privilege in the United States where many of us have had a sort of illusion of security of place, but we're in changing times now. There's no way that I could have prepared myself for what happened in North Carolina. I don't think the human mind has evolved for that, but the preparation I had done is cultivating a deep and profound meditation practice. And what this offers us is the opportunity to really, not as a concept, not as an idea, as an embodiment, to trust reality rather than to fear, to love rather than to blame, to live, not to exist in a field of future existential threat. This is the business of living in the present moment, and this is the only preparation that there is, okay? So I want to offer a few practical encouragements. And the first is, as we're navigating this acceleration of change, to notice how easy it can be to go into not just stories of blame and division and finger pointing. It can be easy, right? But to really look for the place beyond division, presence, experientially opens us up to a sense felt, known, and true of in this together. And division doesn't taste good from that place. Division does not present itself as the only option. Division doesn't really carry weight in the face of known unity. Likewise, the place of presence opens us up to an awe that can be really, really helpful. I felt in my heart of hearts with childlike wonder, absolute awe for Hurricane Helene, absolute awe for nature's might. I feel the same for the fires which have ravaged through so many lands in California that I have loved and spent time in this lifetime, and homes of loved ones that have been lost, that have been decimated. When we remember our awe for Mother Nature, we can really learn from and embody more deeply the teachings of holism, that everything is a whole, everything. And so, of course, if we're practicing fracking on one side of the globe, the impact of the earth of war on another part of the planet, I could go on and on and on. There is a tipping point. There is a tipping point. And I think for many of us, there's a sobriety happening right now, and I hope it can be a compassionate, heartfelt, loving sobriety of what does it mean to be living through the tipping point. Not just one, there will be multiple. But this also opens up the teachings of accountability for responsibility and conscious response. So I find that such a beautiful thing. It nourishes my soul every time I contemplate that we're responsible for everything we do, that how we walk in the world has effect, that we have a choice in each moment for how we impact, that there are consequences. That lights me up, okay? Because it informs and deepens our knowing that we are not separate, and the courage with which we can love, okay? I also want to encourage people to really acknowledge that the invitation of so much changing at once, okay, is an invitation of celebrating who and what we really are, who and what we actually are, rather than waiting for someday. Being who and what we actually are, rather than waiting for someday. So in the aftermath of the hurricane, and I know those of you who are close in to the California fires are witnessing this there, our region might have been a little bit unique. That's what a lot of the relief people who came through said they were seeing an example in Western North Carolina, and I'm not. What we witnessed was a level of benevolence and a level of service and a level of, I know what matters now. Everyone is my neighbor. No one left out. Everyone has needs. I'm here. I can offer and I can receive too. We are in this together. That is true nature. I'll just be honest. I don't know when my time will be to die, but I witnessed something in the aftermath of that hurricane that the closest experience I have of it before is my life at a Zen Buddhist monastery. It's what happens when a collective shows up in truth. And truth is, life is impermanent, and service is our greatest source of truth and joy. And so, how is that manifesting for each of you? What's alive for you when I presence that? I noticed the invitation for people to plug in so many different ways. There was almost more what I would call the yin. I'm going to frame this as the yin and the yang together, and a little bit, and I know I'm just going to apologize if this language is not ideal for anyone, but a little bit of sort of the maternal and paternal response. But that there were ways more from the yin, like I was in an injured body after the hurricane. I could still attend to so many ways of being of service constantly by taking care of details, making sure people were fed, making sure we were keeping everything clean as we could. That is so important after a crisis. It feeds well-being and sanity, to taking care of small details that helped everything to not get stagnant. And then there are other people who are in stronger bodies and who could help with uncovering people from the rubble and getting on tractors and putting some of the roads back into place. We all have a place in service. Some people have more resources. They were able to dedicate to our GoFundMe, and some people could give $20, but it came from their heart, and it allows us to pay for a plane ticket to come to a place where people are sheltering us this winter. Every one of our efforts helps. You with me? So when I had the sense that I needed to just show up and hold a gathering on this topic, I first said, well, it has to be a day-long retreat because this topic is so vast. It's so vast. But I know in all practicality, people have a lot to attend to right now. I have relatives for whom we've just found places they can go because they no longer have a place in LA or have lung disease. They need to get out of the city. So I want to keep today short. I'm going to end these reflections with the poem and then invite people into breakout rooms before we come back to have a period for questions and reflections. And what I'll say is, I think we can do breakout rooms in just pairs today. So I'm going to invite Amber, who's generously assisting today. Thank you for being of service, to just begin to prepare those rooms. And if anyone is choosing to be out of a breakout room, and you don't have to come on screen, but it is a really lovely invitation to connect with another human through a guided inquiry I'll give you, let Amber know in the chat box now if for whatever reason that's not for you today. And for everyone, this is a poem by Rashani called Unbroken. And this is a poet I came into contact with towards the end of last year that I'm really appreciating, okay? There is a brokenness out of which comes the unbroken, a shatteredness out of which blooms the unshatterable. There is a sorrow beyond all grief, which leads to joy, and a fragility out of whose depths emerges strength. There is a hollow space too vast for words, through which we pass with each loss, out of whose darkness we are sanctioned into being. There is a cry deeper than all sound, whose serrated edges cut the heart as we break open to the place inside, which is unbreakable and whole, while learning to sing.